1915, the Ottoman Empire. With the pretext of the war, the government of the Young Turks decides to find a solution to the Armenian problem. Orders are sent out for the massacre and the deportation of an entire people. Caravans of survivors coming from the Armenian provinces of what is today eastern Turkey, decimated by the attacks of irregular troops of Kurds and by the special organization squads, by epidemics, hunger and thirst, reach Aleppo in Syria. From there, the columns are directed into the desert of Dead Zor, onto the final solution. It was the first organized genocide of the 20th century. The victim, a population which had been living for centuries in that territory. A genocide denied and forgotten, if not for the rediscovered eyewitness accounts. Among them, Armin Wegener, German writer and poet, a health officer who in 1915, within the framework of the German-Turkish alliance, found himself following the deportation routes. Armin Theophil Wegener, a convinced pacifist, was born in Wuppertal in Germany in 1886 and died in Rome in 1978. From this experience, he drew the energy for his future battles in defense of human and civil rights.
Never more forget what I have seen.
Armenia, the plain of Ararat on the border with Turkey.
This is what happened to the witness who tried to bring their tragedy and their end to the attention of the world. He continued to bear the burden of his promise to remember the dead once back in the West. But no one wanted to listen anymore. My conscience calls me to be a witness. I am the voice of the exiled people. A voice that cries in the desert. The people of even larger nations have experienced great suffering. The witness remains, full of shame and feeling a little guilty, for he has seen things that no one can see without risking one's life. Does this not perhaps mean that he must die like one who has seen the face of God?
Etchmiadzin, the holy seat of the Catholicos, the spiritual guide of all Armenians. Misha Wegener, architect, Armin Wegener's son, and Piero Kuchukyan, dental surgeon and writer. Going towards the cathedral of Etchmiadzin, the spiritual heart of Armenia. Piero Kuchukyan, who has made himself the interpreter of a wish expressed by the personality of the Armenian intelligentsia, has accompanied Misha Wegener to Yerevan with his father's ashes. Ashes that will be interred in the genocide mausoleum in memory of the role that the German writer played. Thus begins a journey, threading itself along the memories and traces left by the letters and photographs of Armin Wegener. A journey backwards in time, to retravel an epic of horrors as far as Deir Zor in Syria, in that desert of the void where a people and its destiny vanished. A route starting off in quest for answers so that what has happened will not be forgotten.
I was walking along a crowded road. I was alone and nobody could see my face aglow, my eyes filled with souls. Everything was still unfold, and what broken roses were floating the air as a drain fell over my face, and a quiet girl as lips screamed to God. In her dream she's died
Funeral service in honor of Armin Wegener.
Quando mio padre è morto, mi aveva fatto promettere che avrei gettato le
When my father died, he made me promise to throw his ashes into the volcano of Stromboli. I did so, but only a part of them. It was a difficult decision to part with him and to bring him here. Perhaps destiny is being fulfilled.
Forse questo era il destino e con questo si è compiuto.
The Armenian people will never forget your father, nor Anatole France, Franz Werfel, Lepsius, Nansen, nor all the others who have helped our people reconstruct their past. Of our history, our historians speak very little and weakly. I bow down to your father for this. May his memory be eternal, my friend, eternal.
Whatever the witness does, he is met by silence. In whatever direction he turns, he knocks on closed doors. We have our own sorrow, people think, or say, we bear the tragedies of our own people. Why should we torment ourselves with the pain of others, long forgotten?
A survivor from Van. My uncle, a school inspector, approached the Turkish governor to protest the bitter treatment of the Armenians. The governor got angry. "You bastard, son of bastards, how dare you speak to me like that?" He then ordered the gendarme to tear out his tongue and to bring it to him. At that time, my uncle was helping to build schools both for the Turks and for the Armenians. My father went to take my uncle's body and saw that they had torn out his tongue and wedged his teeth into his forehead. They wanted to show that the Armenians had no right to talk, to protest, and they wanted to show that they, the Turks, could do anything they wanted to the Armenians.
Come si dice grazie? Sono a calcio.
Two survivors of Kars. My father was an intellectual, and during the deportation he took ill. The Turkish doctor who arrived knew that my father was a cultured man, and so, instead of giving him medicine, he gave him poison. It was my mother who insisted that he take it, thinking it would heal him. He cried, "No, I don't want it." As soon as he swallowed it, he died. And these are human remains, a skull, a tibia from the desert of Deir Zor, of those who died in the desert, of the deported.
Morti nel deserto, deportati.
Mio padre aveva un teschio che ha tenuto sempre con sé, che aveva portato
My father had a skull which he always kept with him, that he had brought from the desert and which he kept on his desk at Positano and then at Stromboli, and I think it's now at the Museum of Wuppertal. These are Turkish gendarmes, zaptier, who like hunters are showing off their prey.
Cacciatori mettono in mostra la loro preda.
I took many photographs on my last days there. I had been told that Germal Pasha, the Syrian butcher, had forbidden the taking of photographs in the refugee camps on pain of death. So I have kept these images of terror and accusation under my belt.
Un telegramma del 1900.
This is a telegram from the Ministry of the Interior of that time, Talat Pasha, sent to the prefect of Aleppo.
Alla prefettura di Aleppo. Ed è la data del 29 settembre esattamente del 15, in cui si dice che
The date is the 29th of September 1915, and it says, as previously communicated by the government by orders of Gemal, it has been decided to completely exterminate all Armenians living in Turkey.
quelli che si opporranno a quest'ordine
Those officials who oppose these orders can no longer take part in the government. Without regard for women, children or the sick, without listening to the sentiments of conscience, we have to put an end to them.
senza riguardo per le donne, i bambini e gli ammalati.
This was the official telegram, a true and proper order of annihilation.
Ecco, vedi, questo dovrebbe essere l'aula di un tribunale.
So you see, Misha, this seems to be an ideal courtroom. The 12 important witnesses, and here is the tomb. Half is inside and half is outside, symbolizing the historical Armenia and independent Armenia.
L'Armenia storica, probabilmente l'Armenia indipendente all'interno. Lo spettatore, il frequentatore del museo.
A person coming into the museum enters there and comes out here, reading, and then coming out of the exit having expressed a judgment.
Quando uscirà dalla porta avrà espresso probabilmente un giudizio. I testimoni.
There are 12 witnesses, these 12 stones, among which that of your father in the center, a very important figure.
Padre, qui proprio in centro, l'hanno messo in centro, una figura molto importante.
It's very meaningful, but who do they represent?
Morgenthau, che era l'ambasciatore.
Morgenthau, the United States ambassador, who saw many things in Turkey. Nansen, a Norwegian who saved many Armenians and who made passports for displaced persons. Anatole France. Toynbee. Lepsius, and of course your father.
Ovviamente, come ti ho detto. Ecco, tuo padre qui dice quelle cose.
Your father says those things that you know better than I. The Armenians have died all the deaths of the world. Genocide hurts not only those who suffer it, but the whole of humanity, and also those who execute it.
Ma all'intera umanità e anche a chi lo esegue.
At the beginning of the 20s, when the witness of these horrors foresaw that the same thing could occur in the West, and illustrated what he had seen with numerous photographs and all the documentation that he could collect from the extermination camps, those that came to know of these things in Germany and in neighboring countries were seized with fear, but thought, the Arabian desert is so far away.
The 24th of April 1915 at Constantinople, 600 Armenian intellectuals were arrested during the night and deported towards Kayseri and massacred along the way. The Armenian nation, with its intelligentsia amputated, could now be directed toward annihilation. Talat Pasha, Minister of the Interior of the government of the Young Turks, together with Gemal Pasha and Enver Pasha, was the author of the genocide. In 1915, Talat had hypothesized the total disappearance of the Armenian people within 50 years. On the 24th of April 1965, exactly 50 years later, a crowd of hundreds of thousands of Armenians, going against Soviet laws for the first time, gathered together on this hill to bear witness to their survival. In 1921 in Berlin, there was a trial against Sogomon Tehlirian, the assassin of Talat Pasha, the Turkish Minister of the Interior. One of the witnesses for the defense was Armin Wegener. Sogomon Tehlirian, even though he was the assassin, was acquitted, while the victim, Talat Pasha, was implicitly recognized as guilty of the atrocities committed and held responsible for the deportation and the extermination of the Armenian people. On the 23rd of February 1919, Armin Wegener sent an open letter to the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson. The letter, after describing the atrocities suffered by the persecuted, ends with a hope for a fatherland for the Armenians. After a noble attempt by Wilson, the project failed. On the 11th of April 1933, Armin Wegener, immediately after the laws against the Jews, sent a letter to Hitler condemning the anti-Semitic behavior of the regime. For this gesture, he was persecuted by the Gestapo and obliged to flee from Germany, where he would never return. Armin Wegener, the 28th of April 1968, during a conference held at the Armenia House of Milan, stated, "If those responsible for the massacre and genocide of the Armenians had been punished, there would have been no genocide of the Jews." Genocide of the Armenians, Turkey, 1915 to 1922. Total elimination of the autochthonal Armenian population residing there for 2,500 years. 2 million deported, 1.5 million victims, 500,000 refugees. Today, the population of the Armenian Independent Republic, situated in what remains of the historical Armenia, is 3.5 million.
Guarda, purtroppo, ci ha detto il direttore.
You see, Misha, the director of the Armenian National Film Library has told me that unfortunately they don't have the film we are looking for here in Yerevan.
Questo film è un documentario.
The film that we are watching is a documentary based on the photographs and letters of your father, testimonials, put together with original pieces of documentary film of the period.
Delle lettere e delle foto che aveva fatto tuo padre. È una ricostruzione storica.
It's a historical reconstruction from 1926 with pieces of real documentary footage.
Qui sono crocifissi.
These are crucifixions filmed at the time because I remember the photos.
Proprio di queste crocifissioni. Anche questa è di tuo padre.
This one is your father's too.
Morti ammassati.
The dead piled up in a field.
No,
I don't remember this one.
Questa è una donna morente.
This looks like one of your father's.
Questa è di tuo
This one is of my father. And this is the desert of Deir Zor in Syria.
The mayor of Aleppo at that time was a humane person, and he telegraphed Talat, Minister for Internal Affairs. Thousands of deported Armenians have arrived. What shall I do with them? And Talat, the great enemy of the Armenians, replied, "The destination of the deportation is nothingness."
Piero Kuchukyan, together with the historian Antranik and the guide Abdo, at the house of Dr. Jebejan, the custodian of the largest archive on the deportation of the Armenians in Syria.
As ator եւ այլն ունիկոս նորեն
Այս աթոռները որ գտեցվակ երկու աթոռ եւ մեկ սեղան վերջին օրը
In 1918, the day before the Germans were to leave Aleppo in retreat, there was a sale of their objects. And so my mother went to buy these 2 chairs and this table that had belonged to Armin Wegener.
ինչ պիտի երեն քլուբը աժան լիկվիդացիա
Wegener was the health officer of General von der Goltz, and with him went as far as Baghdad when they fought against the English and took General Hauser prisoner.
աս աթոռները փերավ երկու աթոռ մեկ սեղան արավ փերավ ես հա գիտեմ որ այստեղ է բայր եմ
At that time, Gemal Pasha had forbidden photographs of the Armenian deportees to be taken, at the pain of death. Despite that, Wegener took thousands of photographs. He was intercepted by the Turks, who confiscated them, but a part of them he was able to hide. Wegener was then expelled from Turkey and sent back to Germany.
զինքդ արդեն դուրստրին գնաց Գերմանիա
The Armenian Quarter.
Dove siamo poi?
Qua siamo a Castel Harami.
Here we are at Castel Harami.
Quando I deportati arrivavano alla stazione ferroviaria, che era l'ultima stazione della linea, poi di qua
When the deportees arrived at Aleppo, the last station, they were directed towards the desert of Deir Zor. The Armenians who remained in Aleppo settled in this area.
situati in questa zona, gli arabi gli hanno dato questo territorio.
What was it? A camp for deportees?
Sì, deportati,
Yes,
ma è un campo
it was a
di-
neighborhood where the deported Armenians lived. Every family occupied a room. There were almost 300 families. The Arabs gave them this territory. There was a door that closed them in at night.
Aveva un portone, entravano e di notte si chiudeva questo portone.
They arrived in multitudes at the edge of the desert in Aleppo, the last city, some by rail, others using their own means.
bazaar of Aleppo. Are these the oldest houses? There are only a few families left here, 2 or 3. Shortly this area will be demolished and turned into a public park.
È trasformata in giardino pubblico.
Così
And so everything's forgotten.
siamo nel
We're in the heart of the souk of Aleppo here.
Cos'è?
Questo era un caravanserai.
This is a caravanserai that was called Khan Istanbul. The Turks brought Armenian girls here to work. They made socks and were paid with a piece of dry bread in the evening.
Per farli lavorare delle calze e pagavano al giorno un pane secco.
It's going on now, you know. It's yesterday, you know, you're not allowed to. Today, not allowed to. Today, not allowed to.
Khan Mansour, sorting out place of the deportees in transit from Aleppo.
In spite of the tears of the very young, their innocent stares and bewildered eyes, the Turkish officials, gendarmes and soldiers were not moved, neither did they refuse to deport or slaughter them. In the camps of Meskene and Aleppo, I was given many letters and petitions for the American embassy in Constantinople, which I keep hidden in my knapsack, as they would be intercepted in the post. I am aware that in so doing I am committing an act of high treason, yet at the same time, the awareness of having contributed in a small way to helping these poor folk fills me with a greater joy than that caused by any other action.
The beginning of the route that the columns of deportees coming from Aleppo had to take towards the desert of Deir Zor. From along these routes, Armin Wegener sent letters to friends and relatives in Germany, collected in the volume Road Without Return, Berlin, 1919.
The Mesopotamian steppes. There we find a long tract of land without grass, without trees, without cattle, covered in stunted weeds, populated by men who are unable to show even a touch of pity. A stretch of grey limestone plains several miles in extent, bare wastes of rock and stone, ruined riverbanks, exposed to the rays of a merciless sun, ceaseless autumn rains and frosty winter nights, leaving sheets of ice behind them. I walked along the riverbank in the darkness and found a heap of human bones piled up in a hole, white head still covered with hair, a pelvic arch, the ribs of a child delicately bent like a brooch. For a moment I was overcome by an obscure sense of desperation, and tears came to my eyes, as if all hope, all the tiny buds of love that tie me to all living things, had been lost. The river flowed on endlessly as in a fairy tale, sometimes falling onto clods of waterlogged soil with a sound of thunder, and I walked along its banks, abandoned, as if I were the last man.
The Mesopotamian steppes, the refined along tract of land, without grass, without trees, without cattle, cord.
El Kafir, the house of Armen Satrian, an Islamized Armenian. His brother-in-law is speaking.
نشان ايوه ابوه ايوه نشان فهم الجماعه ابن اعم ابوه ايوه في مرج حمو بيبلش حمو.
My brother-in-law, Armen Satrian, when he was 4 years old, was saved by a gatherer of orphans who gave them to whoever requested them. At the time of the massacres along this road, yes, from Aleppo to the desert of Deir Zor, many Arabs like us saved Armenian orphans. Armen thus came to be a part of an Arab family and growing up married a Bedouin girl who then died. And so he married my sister, sitting here beside me.
Walked along the river banks in the darkness and found a heap of human bones piled up in a hole. White cranium still covered with hair, a pelvic arch, the ribs of a child delicately bent like a brooch.
The caves of Raqqa, refuge of the deported.
From their homes where they had lived for more than 2,000 years, from all parts of the empire, from the stony passes of the mountain region to the shores of the Sea of Marmara and the palmy oases of the south, the Armenians were driven into this desolate waste with the alleged purpose of forcibly transplanting them from their homes to a strange land, a purpose which, even had it been the real one, is repugnant to every human feeling. The men were struck down in batches, bound together with chains and ropes, and thrown into the river or rolled down the mountain with their limbs bound. The women and children were put on sale in the public market, the old men and boys beaten to death on the road whilst doing forced labor.
The Khan of the Soror family. The head of the family, Wahab, explains that in his Khan there live 4 families. His brothers speak English well and they've gone to work in the city. The only farmer that's left is him. He tells how his grandmother was Armenian, rescued by his grandfather when she was 4 years old. His grandfather, at 40, left his wife and married the Armenian girl who had since grown up. My grandfather didn't feel that he should marry her because she was like a daughter to him, but the relatives told him that he could because she was a Christian. He married her and had 8 children, and she remained his only wife, and I am proud to have an Armenian grandmother. I still have Armenian relatives in Turkey at Urfa. Tibne, previously headquarters of the Turkish military command, responsible for the deportation operations in the desert.
Travellers passing along the road turned away their eyes in horror from this moving multitude, driven on with devilish cruelty, only to find in their inns newborn babes buried in the dung heaps of the courtyards, and the roads covered with the severed hands of boys who had raised them in supplication to their torturers. Parties which, on their departure from the homeland of High Armenia, consisted of thousands, numbered on their arrival in the outskirts of Aleppo only a few hundred, while the fields were strewn with swollen, blackened corpses, infecting the air with their odors, lying about desecrated, naked, having been robbed of their clothes, or driven back to the Euphrates to provide food for the fishes. Sometimes, in derision, gendarmes threw some flour into the emaciated hands of the starving people, who desperately licked it off, so fractionally prolonging their moment of death.
Sabka, the Khan Turki of the El Swan family. Elswan, the owner of the Khan, relates that at the time of the massacres, an Armenian family had come to his grandfather to ask for protection, and he had taken them in. The remains of that cart that you see are of the cart they used to get here. The pot was used to make bulgur. The desert between Tibne and Dezor, one of the most inhospitable places of the region crossed through by the deported.
About 2 million Armenians once lived throughout the empire. They have all been driven out. 200,000 from the province of Erzurum, 200,000 from Sivas, 100,000 from Chilicha and the flourishing cities of Anatolia, from Diyarbakir, Van, Izmit, Ankara, Aleppo. The desert has devoured them. For incomprehensible and utterly unjustifiable reasons of war, the decimated parties were ceaselessly driven, barefoot, hundreds of miles under a burning sun, through stony valleys, over pathless steppes, enfeebled by fever and other maladies, into the wilderness of desolation. All the mountain valleys, all the river banks are filled with these camps. This flood of outcasts, hundreds of thousands of refugees, drags itself along through the Taurus and Amanos passes. The flow begins to slacken its pace as it reaches the foot of the mountains, diminishing to a scant trickle in invisible columns towards the plain, finally to disappear into the desert. Where are they going? Where? There is no way of return.
Dezor, a Fayyad Majed Palace, previously the seat of the Turkish government.
In the night, hope, look at me with sadness, while I run to forget. The pain to my heart became
The master of the house recounts that the dwelling was built in 1842, that every year many Armenian pilgrims come to visit the Genocide Museum just in front of his building. He remembers that his father, among many others, had saved an Armenian orphan girl, whom he later married off outside the family because for them she was a sister. His father told them of how the Turks killed, raped the adults and burned the children. He finishes with his memory of the governor, Ali Suad Bey, who lived in this building. This man, for having saved many Armenian orphans, was removed from his post and killed by the Turks. His place was taken by the Turkish governor, Zeki Bey.
eyes of a child. These I hear with my heart, because it's here. The eyes of a child.
Islamic graveyard and the caverns of the orphans. The custodian of the graveyard shows the partially caved-in entrance to the caverns where the Turkish governor of Dezor, Zeki Bey, had burned alive 500 Armenian orphans who had previously been saved by Ali Suad Bey. Ex-Turkish district in the Souk of Dezor.
I am making no accusation against Islam. The spirit of every great religion is noble, and the conduct of many a Mohammedan has made us blush for the deeds of Europe. I do not accuse the simple people of this country whose souls are full of goodness. But I do not think that the members of the ruling class will ever, in the course of history, be capable of making their country happy.
The Genocide Mausoleum.
They died, slain by Kurds, robbed by gendarmes, shot, hanged, poisoned, stabbed, strangled, mown down by epidemics, drowned, frozen, parched with thirst, starved, their bodies left to putrefy or to be devoured by jackals. Children wept themselves to death, men dashed themselves against the rocks, mothers threw their babies into the brooks, women with child flung themselves singing into the Euphrates. They died all the deaths on the earth, the deaths of all times.
Who remembers today the massacre of the Armenians? Adolf Hitler, 1938. After long preliminaries, the Bedouin recounts all that he had come to know from his father about the Armenians. One evening, Turkish gendarmes arrived in their village. They ordered all of the Armenians to undress and to follow them into the desert. There was a boy in all of those shot down who had survived and who was saved the morning after by a shepherd. When he was 18, he went one day to Aleppo searching for a brothel because he had never known a woman. He found a young girl and made her his. Then, while saying goodbye, he noticed a mark on her hand that he remembered having seen on his mother's hand as well. The girl told him then that she was an Armenian sold to the Turks as a slave. In the end, they discovered that they were brother and sister.
The music of your words, for mad love poem, and all the things that will be in fiends. You are my baby, and I'll be always stand next to you. Maybe you are not here, but this is the voice of a child. This I hear with my heart, because it is the voice of a child.
Quello sembra un cranio. Questo potrebbe essere.
This one seems to be a skull. This one could be an ulna or the radial bone of a child. A piece of cranium, surely. You can still see the osseous lacunae here. This area is full of bones.
هو مو طبيب عم بيشوف اي مكان من الجسم perché parlava molto.
Questi sono due denti da ratto.
Here are two baby teeth, so this was a child. Here is a tooth of an old man, and this is a piece of the jawbone. This one is a molar that's so worn down from use that it seems like a canine. It was very old, 80 or more.
Forse di consumarsi, ma naturalmente si è consumato. Questo deve aver avuto almeno 80 e più anni.
I have seen maddened deportees eating their own feces, women cooking the bodies of their newborn babies, young girls dissecting the still warm bodies of their mothers to search for the gold hidden from the rapacity of the gendarme in their intestines. In ruined caravanserais, they lay between heaps of corpses and half-rotted bodies with no one to pity them, waiting for death. But all this is only a fraction of what I have seen myself, of what I have been told by my acquaintances or by travellers, or of what I have heard from the mouths of deportees.
Shaddadeh, the mass grave of the Armenians.
Cos'è questo?
What is this place, Antranik? Where are we?
Siamo a Shaddadeh. I deportati armeni.
At Shaddadeh.
Gruppi
One group after another of deported Armenians came here and were amassed by the Turks. But who told you of this? The Bedouin? Yes, the Bedouin who's gone down there now told me. But was it his father who told him about it? Yes, he told him about it when he was a child. And then, what did they do to the Armenians? They covered this hole with wood and set fire to it, and the Armenians suffocated to death. They couldn't get out. Then when the rains came, the underground river swelled and carried the cadavers away into the Euphrates. How many dead here, Antranik? Almost 80,000 people died here. But where did they come from? They came from the north of Armenia, from Kars, from Erzurum, from Van.
دا قارس دا فان كيف كانوا يجيبوا للأرمن يمشوا للأرمن كانوا بيضربوا شو كانوا بيعملوا؟
كانوا والله يضربونهم ويحرقونهم ويفوتون يقول يفوتون يا أبو خزل لخزل كل 20 كل 15 كل 10 كل 100 كل 50 سوا ويضربونهم.
Dice che li portavano 500,000 persone.
The Bedouin says that they brought 500, 1,000, 2,000 people at a time, and they drove them, beating them with clubs, forcing them to enter the pit.
أول يلا الكبار لاقين في عظام هنا ومجزرة هنا يا ابن الحلال مجزرة.
The Bedouin says that here was a massacre. Stromboli. I'm in Wegner's house. So then, how was your journey in Syria? Come on, let's go upstairs. I have a lot of things to tell you. I interviewed a lot of people who knew your father. Was your father interested in Stromboli or also in the volcano?
Sicuramente anche al vulcano. L'isola è tutta un vulcano.
The island is all volcano. It's a place where everything is reduced, but with an enormous intensity. The last time that my father went up on the volcano, he went alone. He was 80 years old and asked that a guide come up to get him. In his will, he wrote that his ashes should be thrown into the volcano, which I did carry out in part. I climbed up onto the volcano, got near the crater, and threw a part of the ashes into it.
Questo atto che andavo a fare e salì sul vulcano e mi avvicinai ai crateri quanto possibile e buttai una parte delle ceneri.
And the other part? The other part were those we took to Yerevan.
One part of my soul was tied to Israel, a part to Armenia, a part to Italy, and another to England. Another part is on the Lipari Islands, at the foot of the Stromboli volcano, where I restored a tower so I could see the sea. In fact, I no longer had a fatherland, but could feel at home anywhere. In Israel, I lived in a wood in which a tree had been planted and given my name. In the Armenian capital, a street had been called after me. And at Stromboli, on the ceiling of my study in the tower, there is a comforting phrase that goes, "We have been assigned a task, but not allowed to complete it."
Why put one's own soul into the mouth of a volcano? A witness of atrocious deeds finds no peace. His own choices no longer belong to him. He relives the atrocities day after day. Primo Levi became a writer to mitigate the torment of living among the saved. Armin Wegener seeks reconciliation underneath a volcano, the bare image of his lacerations.
Here is a photograph where you see Armenian priests to make the grave for the dead. And I remember that one of these priests said to me, "Once I was a priest and now I am a lamb who is gone to be killed." I came in Turkey as a member of the German Red Cross, and in this quality I came through the whole desert of Mesopotamia and was a witness of the terrible persecution of the poor Armenian people and saw the terrible sacrifice. A witness is a very difficult task. I could never more forget what I have seen. I was always willing to speak of this terrible thing and to say to the peoples, don't care that not a second time the same terrible thing can repeat. As an officer of the Turkish army for the wounded soldiers, I had no difficulty to enter the camps, and I make many photographs. Later on, I have written a letter to the President Wilson to help the Armenians. And always I tried to do and to write of this terrible thing. But it was a long time not possible for me. Often I had to think on the Bible when God has spoken to Lot, you shall not say what I make. You shall not visit Sodom and Gomorrah. And I was disobedient.
Goodbye, I want you leave.
from their homes where they had lived for more than 2,000 years, from all parts of the empire, from the stony passes of the mountain region to the shores of the Sea of Marmara and the palmy oases of the south, the Armenians were driven into this desolate waste with the alleged purpose of forcibly transplanting them from their homes to a strange land, a purpose which, even had it been the real one, is repugnant and every human thinking. They died all the deaths of the earth, the deaths of all times. We have been assigned to tasks, but not allowed to complete it. For incomprehensible and utterly injustifiable reasons of war, the decimated parties were ceaselessly driven, barefooted, hundreds of miles under burning sun, through stony defiles, over pathless steppes, enfeebled by fever and other maladies, through semi-tropical marshes into the wilderness of desolation.